They fined me $50,000 for my solar panels because they were ruining the neighborhood aesthetics. They called my environmentally friendly technology an eyesore and took me to court. The next day when I cut power to their entire neighborhood and the courtroom went dark, the judge asked, "Who cut the power?" And they saw me smiling from the defendant's chair. My solar panels were actually their only source of electricity. Being an electrical engineer can be pretty ironic sometimes. Sometimes justice comes with very high voltage. What would you do if someone who fined you for clean energy discovered you actually control their entire power grid? Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. This story is about to get very illuminating. My name is Marcus Thompson, 38 years old, and I'm a senior electrical engineer for the Texas Regional Power Authority. What started as a simple home improvement project became a masterclass in how environmental ignorance and HOA overreach can leave an entire community sitting in the dark, literally. Let me take you back 14 months ago when I first purchased the house at 4217 Sunset Ridge Drive in Ridgewood Hills, an upscale suburban community about 30 miles outside of Dallas. I'd just been promoted to regional grid manager after 12 years of working my way up through Texas's power infrastructure system. Bachelor's degree in electrical engineering, master's in sustainable energy systems, and someone who'd spent his entire career designing and maintaining the electrical grids that keep Texas running. The house was perfect for my needs. South-facing roof with minimal shade, excellent sun exposure for solar panel installation, and most importantly, it sat at the intersection of 3 major power transmission lines that fed electricity to the entire Ridgewood Hills development and 4 surrounding communities. See, when you work in power grid management, you develop a deep appreciation for energy independence and renewable technology. You understand that the traditional electrical grid is aging, inefficient, and vulnerable to both natural disasters and human error. Solar panels aren't just about saving money on electric bills. They're about energy security and environmental responsibility. That's exactly what I was thinking the Saturday morning when I started installing my new 40-panel solar array system on my roof. Professional-grade photovoltaic panels, high-efficiency inverters, battery backup storage, and monitoring systems that would make most commercial installations jealous. The whole setup cost me $35,000 and would generate enough clean electricity to power my house, plus feed excess energy back into the grid. I was up on the roof adjusting the angle on the 3rd row of panels when I heard the sound of expensive heels clicking across my concrete driveway like an approaching storm system. Brenda Morrison appeared around the corner of my house wearing a bright red blazer that screamed HOA official business and carrying herself with the aggressive confidence of someone who'd spent years getting her way through intimidation and manufactured authority. She was tall, probably in her early 50s, with perfectly styled blonde hair and the kind of expression people wear when they're about to ruin your weekend with bureaucratic nonsense. "Excuse me," Brenda called up to me, her voice carrying that particular tone wealthy suburbanites use when addressing people they consider beneath their social status. "I'm Brenda Morrison, president of the Ridgewood Hills Homeowners Association. We need to discuss your ongoing violation of architectural review guidelines and community aesthetic standards." I looked down from my roof at Brenda, then at the solar panels I was installing, then back at Brenda, trying to figure out how generating clean renewable energy could possibly violate anyone's aesthetic standards. "Mrs. Morrison, I'm not sure what you mean. These are solar panels. They're designed to generate electricity from sunlight and reduce my dependence on the traditional power grid." Brenda's laugh was sharp and dismissive, like fingernails scraping across expensive crystal. "Sir, I don't care what those things are supposed to do. They're unsightly, inappropriate for our community, and installed without proper approval from the Architectural Review Board." The irony hit me like lightning. Here I was, the person responsible for maintaining the electrical infrastructure that powered Brenda's entire community, being lectured about the inappropriateness of renewable energy technology by someone who probably couldn't identify a transformer if it fell on her perfectly manicured lawn. "Mrs. Morrison, I think there might be some misunderstanding about HOA authority over renewable energy installations. Texas state law actually protects homeowners' rights to install solar panels, regardless of HOA restrictions." But Brenda was already pulling out her phone, taking photos of my solar panels like she was documenting evidence for federal court. Her documentation process was so thorough and aggressive that it made my installation work difficult to continue. "Sir, I don't know what you think you've read about state law, but Ridgewood Hills has very specific architectural guidelines that apply to all exterior modifications. You should have submitted plans for review before installing any rooftop equipment. Brenda pulled out a folder, thick enough to choke a horse, filled with printed pages that looked like they'd been highlighted with the enthusiasm of someone building a case for the prosecution. According to Ridgewood Hills Community Covenant Section 12.4, all exterior modifications, including rooftop installations, must be approved by the Architectural Review Board before construction begins. You're in violation of community standards and subject to immediate fines and legal action. The confidence in her voice was impressive, especially considering she was completely wrong about both Texas renewable energy law and her HOA's actual authority over state-protected installations. Mrs. Morrison, I can see you've put effort into researching this issue. However, I think you might want to review Texas Property Code Chapter 202, which specifically limits HOA authority over solar panel installations. Brenda's expression shifted to that superior smirk people wear when they think they know more than you do about your own area of expertise. Honey, I've been HOA president for 8 years. I know exactly what authority we have and don't have over property modifications. These ugly panels are destroying our community's visual appeal and property values. They're inappropriate for a prestigious neighborhood like Ridgewood Hills, and they're coming down whether you like it or not. That's when I knew Brenda Morrison was about to learn a very expensive lesson about making assumptions regarding people's professional qualifications and legal knowledge. Mrs. Morrison, I appreciate your concern about community aesthetics. Would you mind if I asked what specific training or experience you have with Texas energy law or electrical systems? I don't need training in electrical systems to recognize when someone is damaging community property values with industrial equipment on their roof. And what about your experience with power grid management or renewable energy integration? I don't need experience with power grids to know that solar panels don't belong in residential neighborhoods. That's when I realized Brenda was about to discover that the person she was trying to intimidate actually controlled the electrical infrastructure that kept her air conditioning running and her security systems powered. Mrs. Morrison, I appreciate your dedication to community standards. Would you like to know more about how electrical systems actually work in residential developments? But Brenda was already backing away from my house, clutching her folder of misunderstood regulations like a shield against information that might challenge her predetermined conclusions. Sir, I've said what I came to say. You have 72 hours to remove those panels or submit proper architectural plans for review. Installing rooftop equipment without approval violates multiple community covenants and could result in fines up to $50,000. The threat was clear. Even if you're legally right, we can tie you up in expensive HOA litigation while charging you for our legal costs in the process. Standard HOA intimidation designed to force compliance through financial exhaustion. Mrs. Morrison, I welcome any legal proceeding that will clarify HOA authority over state-protected renewable energy installations. I'm confident that Texas law supports homeowners' rights to generate clean electricity. I handed her my business card, noting her slight change in expression when she read, Marcus Thompson, Senior Grid Manager, Texas Regional Power Authority. The difference between HOA President and State Electrical Infrastructure Manager was immediately obvious to anyone familiar with actual authority hierarchies. Mr. Thompson, I hope you understand the seriousness of these proceedings. Legal costs can accumulate quickly when property disputes drag through the courts. Mrs. Morrison, I understand completely. I also understand that filing frivolous lawsuits against state-protected renewable energy installations can result in sanctions and attorney fees awarded to defendants. Brenda left my driveway that afternoon with less confidence than she'd arrived with, but I could tell from her expression that this was far from over. HOA presidents don't back down easily when their authority gets challenged, especially by people they don't think have the resources to fight back. That evening, I called my attorney Jake Rodriguez to get advice on HOA solar panel disputes. Jake had been handling my property transactions for 6 years and knew the ins and outs of Texas renewable energy law better than anyone in Dallas. Marcus, he said, after I explained my encounter with Brenda Morrison, you need to be very careful here. HOAs can make life miserable even when they're legally wrong. They have money, lawyers, and political connections that can drag out disputes for years. But it's my house, Jake, and Texas law specifically protects solar installations. I know, but HOAs operate in a legal gray area where they can file complaints, demand hearings, and tie you up in bureaucratic nonsense indefinitely. The question is, how badly do you want to keep those panels versus just paying their fines and moving somewhere else? The answer was that I didn't particularly care about avoiding conflict with entitled suburban tyrants who thought they could override state environmental law through HOA intimidation tactics. My solar panels were legal, appropriate, and environmentally responsible. I wasn't about to let some community association president decide what kind of energy I could generate on my own property. Jake, I want you to research everything about Ridgewood Hills HOA authority and Texas renewable energy protections. If they want to challenge state law, let's make sure we understand the legal framework better than they do. That's when Jake said something that would prove prophetic. Marcus, when people attack renewable energy for aesthetic reasons, they tend to get sloppy with their legal research. They assume environmental technology is automatically wrong and miss the fact that state governments actively protect it. The next morning brought Brenda's first official escalation. She'd filed complaints with county zoning, state architectural boards, and local building inspectors, claiming my solar installation violated multiple codes and represented a public safety hazard. The building inspector, Robert Martinez, arrived at my house Tuesday afternoon, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else than investigating complaints about legal renewable energy installations. He was a middle-aged Hispanic man who approached my roof system with the weary expression of someone who'd spent too many years dealing with HOA drama disguised as safety issues. "Mr. Thompson, I'm here about solar panel complaints. Can you show me your installation permits and electrical connections?" "Absolutely, Inspector Martinez." I handed him my folder containing building permits, electrical inspection certificates, and professional installation documentation. Everything's up to code and professionally installed. Inspector Martinez spent 20 minutes reviewing every component, checking electrical connections, and documenting system specifications. His thorough professionalism was clearly disappointing to Brenda Morrison, who'd positioned herself across the street to watch me get shut down for safety violations. "Mr. Thompson, this is one of the cleanest residential solar installations I've seen. Professional grade components, proper electrical integration, excellent safety protocols. I don't see any code violations here." The small crowd of HOA supporters who'd gathered to watch my comeuppance began whispering among themselves, their expressions shifting from anticipation to confusion. This wasn't the outcome they'd expected when Brenda told them the dangerous electrical equipment would be removed for safety reasons. "However," Inspector Martinez continued, raising his voice slightly so the crowd could hear, "I do want to document that several residents have expressed concerns about visual impact and property values. While you're not violating any safety codes, you might consider working with the community to address aesthetic concerns." The diplomatic language was code for, "Please don't make my life more difficult by escalating this into a bigger political issue." Inspector Martinez was trying to give everyone a face-saving way out of a situation that could easily spiral into media attention and city council involvement. "Inspector Martinez, I'm always happy to be a good neighbor. If anyone has specific technical concerns about my installation, I'm available for discussion. I just want to generate clean energy and contribute positively to grid stability." That evening, Jake Rodriguez called with news that would change everything about my dispute with Brenda Morrison. "Marcus, I've been digging into Ridgewood Hills HOA, and there's something interesting about their power supply situation. The entire development is fed by a single transformer substation that routes through electrical infrastructure you directly manage. What does that mean practically? It means if there were ever a power outage or grid maintenance issue affecting their electrical supply, you'd be the person with authority to restore or interrupt service to the entire community." The implications hit me like lightning. If Brenda Morrison wanted to fight about electrical systems and power generation, she'd picked the wrong electrical engineer to intimidate. I didn't just understand renewable energy technology. I controlled the traditional power grid that her entire community depended on. "Jake, I need you to order a comprehensive review of Ridgewood Hills electrical service agreements and my authority over regional grid management for their area." That's exactly what I was thinking. Marcus, this could get very interesting very quickly. If you have infrastructure management authority over their power supply, Brenda Morrison might have bigger problems than she realizes. The next morning brought escalation that proved Brenda had learned nothing from her failure with building inspectors. At exactly 7:30 a.m., while I was checking my solar panel output readings, I heard sirens approaching my house. Two fire department emergency vehicles pulled up to my driveway, followed by an electric utility truck and county safety inspector. The cavalry had arrived for what was apparently being reported as some kind of serious electrical hazard involving my solar installation. Captain Steve Patterson emerged from the first fire truck, with the cautious approach of someone expecting to find dangerous electrical equipment, but hoping to find a simple misunderstanding instead. He was a stocky man in his 40s with the calm professionalism that comes from years of dealing with Dallas area emergencies. "Sir, I'm Captain Patterson with Dallas County Fire Rescue. We received reports of potentially hazardous electrical installation that could pose fire risks to the neighborhood. We need to inspect your system and may need to disconnect the power pending safety evaluation." "Captain Patterson, these are professionally installed solar panels with full building permits and electrical inspections. What kind of fire hazard was reported?" The caller reported improperly installed electrical equipment with exposed wiring, overloaded circuits, and potential for electrical fires that could spread to neighboring properties. I felt my stomach drop. False reports of fire hazards were serious business that could result in immediate disconnection of my electrical service, expensive emergency inspections, and criminal charges if someone actually got hurt from allegedly dangerous equipment. "Captain Patterson, my installation was completed by licensed professionals and passed all required inspections. Would you like to see my safety certification and electrical permits?" I showed him my documentation, while the electric utility crew prepared to disconnect my service if fire hazards were confirmed. Captain Patterson reviewed everything carefully, while his team waited to see if their emergency response would be needed. "Sir, your documentation looks solid, and I don't see any obvious safety hazards. Can you walk me through your electrical connections so we can verify proper installation?" I spent 15 minutes explaining my system design, safety protocols, and professional installation standards. Captain Patterson's questions were technical and informed, clearly coming from someone who understood electrical systems better than typical emergency responders. "Mr. Thompson, I have to say, this is one of the most professionally installed residential solar systems I've encountered. Whoever reported fire hazards either doesn't understand solar technology or was deliberately providing false information." The utility crew began packing up their disconnection equipment, clearly relieved that their morning emergency call had turned out to be another false alarm. Captain Patterson's radio crackled with updates from other actual emergencies that required immediate attention. "Sir, this appears to be a false report, possibly filed maliciously to interfere with your legal renewable energy installation. False emergency reports waste public resources and can result in charges against whoever filed them." I looked across the street where Brenda Morrison was standing in her front yard, clearly expecting to see my solar panels surrounded by yellow tape and disconnected by safety officials. Her expression shifted from smug anticipation to shocked disappointment as she watched the emergency vehicles leave without taking any action against my installation. "Captain Patterson, if I continue receiving harassment through false emergency reports, what's the best way to document everything for potential criminal charges?" "Document every incident, keep copies of all your permits and inspections, and file formal complaints if the pattern continues. We take false reporting seriously, especially when it diverts resources from genuine emergencies." After Captain Patterson left, I called Jake Rodriguez to report this latest escalation and get advice on criminal charges for false emergency reporting. "Marcus, this has moved beyond HOA complaints into potential criminal territory. False reports of fire hazards are felonies in Texas, especially when they're made maliciously to damage someone's property or business. I'm already documenting everything, but Jake, I want you to accelerate research into my power grid authority over Ridgewood Hills. If Brenda Morrison is going to escalate to criminal behavior, I want to know exactly what leverage we have. I'm on it, but Marcus, be very careful. When people start filing false emergency reports, it means they're desperate, and desperate people do unpredictable things." That afternoon brought the development I should have anticipated. Brenda Morrison arrived at my house at exactly 2 p.m., accompanied by two men in expensive suits, carrying briefcases and wearing expressions that screamed high-priced legal intimidation. "Mr. Thompson, this is Bradley Hughes from Hughes and Associates, and David Chen from the Texas property law firm. They represent Ridgewood Hills HOA in legal matters concerning covenant violations and renewable energy disputes." Bradley Hughes stepped forward with the aggressive confidence of someone accustomed to intimidating homeowners through legal complexity and expensive hourly rates. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder that looked official enough to impress judges and terrify ordinary citizens. "Mr. Thompson, we represent the Ridgewood Hills Homeowners Association in this matter. Our clients have made good faith efforts to resolve your architectural violations through reasonable discussion, but you've chosen to continue violating community covenants despite repeated warnings. Mr. Hughes, I've explained that my solar installation is protected under Texas renewable energy law and doesn't require HOA approval." Hughes continued without acknowledging my response, clearly following a script designed to maximize intimidation while minimizing actual legal discussion. "Mr. Thompson, our clients have instructed us to file for injunctive relief in Dallas County District Court to halt your installation pending resolution of covenant violations. Additionally, we're prepared to seek damages for diminished property values, legal costs, and community assessment fees related to your non-compliance." The threat was clear. Even if you're legally right, we can tie you up in expensive litigation for years, while charging you for our legal costs and community damages in the process. "Mr. Hughes, I welcome any legal proceeding that will establish HOA authority over state-protected renewable energy installations. My attorney will be happy to respond to any filings you submit to the court." I handed him Jake Rodriguez's business card, noting his slight change in expression when he read the name of one of Dallas's most respected renewable energy attorneys. Hughes & Associates was a suburban HOA firm specializing in community disputes. Jake Rodriguez was a senior partner at Martinez, Rodriguez, and Kim, one of Texas's premier environmental law practices. "Mr. Thompson, I hope you understand the seriousness of these proceedings and the potential costs involved when architectural disputes require court intervention." "Mr. Hughes, I understand completely. I also understand that filing frivolous lawsuits against state-protected renewable energy installations can result in sanctions and attorney fees awarded to defendants under Texas environmental protection statutes." David Chen had been quietly reviewing my solar installation while Hughes delivered his threats. As someone apparently more familiar with actual renewable energy law, he looked increasingly uncomfortable with the legal position his firm was being asked to defend. "Mr. Hughes," Chen said quietly, "I think we should research Texas Property Code 202 before filing any injunctions against solar installations." Hughes closed his briefcase with less ceremony than he'd opened it, and left with Brenda trailing behind him, looking less satisfied than she'd appeared when they arrived. The legal intimidation hadn't achieved its intended effect of making me remove my panels immediately. That evening, Jake Rodriguez called, with information that would change the entire dynamic of my dispute with Ridgewood Hills HOA. "Marcus, you need to sit down for this. I've completed research into your power grid authority and discovered something that's going to completely flip this solar panel conflict." "What did you find?" "You have direct infrastructure management authority over the electrical substation that provides power to the entire Ridgewood Hills development. If there were ever grid maintenance, emergency repairs, or infrastructure upgrades affecting their area, you'd be the engineer with authority to authorize service interruption or restoration." The implications were staggering. If Brenda Morrison wanted to fight about electrical systems and renewable energy, she'd accidentally picked a fight with the person who controlled whether her community had electricity at all. "Jake, are you absolutely certain about this?" "I've triple-checked your employment records, regional management authority, and electrical infrastructure maps. The Ridgewood Hills development is entirely dependent on power grid infrastructure under your direct professional management. What are my options here? Legally, you have the authority to schedule maintenance, upgrades, or emergency repairs that would temporarily interrupt electrical service to the entire development. If the community wants to understand renewable energy technology, maybe they need some practical education about traditional power grid dependence." The beautiful irony was almost overwhelming. Brenda Morrison had spent weeks attacking my solar panels as inappropriate technology that didn't belong in residential communities. She was about to discover that her entire neighborhood's electrical supply depended on the professional expertise of the same engineer she'd been trying to intimidate. The next morning, I received the formal lawsuit that Brenda's lawyers had filed in Dallas County District Court. The complaint sought immediate injunction against my solar installation, damages for property value reduction, and attorney fees for what they claimed was willful violation of community covenants despite proper legal notice. But buried in their legal filing was a fatal error that demonstrated their complete ignorance of Texas renewable energy law. They'd cited regulations that had been superseded by state environmental protection statutes specifically designed to prevent HOA interference with solar installations. Jake Rodriguez was almost laughing when he called to discuss their legal strategy. Marcus, they just filed a lawsuit claiming authority that doesn't exist under current Texas law. This isn't just a weak case. It's sanctions territory for filing frivolous claims against state-protected activity. What's our response strategy? We're going to request expedited hearing, present evidence of their false emergency reports, demonstrate Texas renewable energy protections, and ask the court for attorney fees under environmental protection statutes. And what about my authority over their power grid? That's our ace in the hole. If they want to argue about electrical systems in court, we'll make sure the judge understands exactly who has actual authority over electrical infrastructure in their community. The hearing was scheduled for the following Thursday at 2 p.m. in Dallas County District Court, Judge Patricia Williams presiding. I'd appeared in Judge Williams' courtroom before as an expert witness in utility disputes, and she had a reputation for being tough on lawyers who filed cases without understanding the technical issues they were claiming to represent. Wednesday evening, I made a decision that would demonstrate the difference between renewable energy generation and traditional power grid dependence in the most educational way possible. I scheduled routine maintenance on the electrical substation 7, the transformer complex that provided power to Ridgewood Hills and 3 surrounding communities. The maintenance was legitimate, necessary, and within my authority as regional grid manager. It was also timed to occur exactly 30 minutes before our court hearing. Thursday morning dawned with the kind of clear Texas sky that makes solar panels incredibly productive, and the anticipation of justice that makes difficult jobs worthwhile. My solar system was generating peak power at exactly 1:30 p.m. when I initiated planned maintenance shutdown of Substation 7. The power outage was immediate and comprehensive. Every house in Ridgewood Hills, including Brenda Morrison's perfect suburban castle, went dark simultaneously. Air conditioning systems stopped running. Security systems switched to battery backup. Garage doors became inoperable. The entire community that had spent months attacking renewable energy technology suddenly had no electricity at all. At exactly 2 p.m., I walked into Judge Williams' courtroom, carrying documentation of my solar system's legal compliance and my authority over regional electrical infrastructure. The courtroom itself was darker than usual because the power outage had affected the courthouse cooling systems and emergency lighting protocols were in effect. Brenda Morrison and her legal team were already seated at the plaintiff's table, looking significantly less confident than they had during our neighborhood confrontations. Bradley Hughes was frantically checking his phone, apparently trying to understand why his office building had lost power during their most important HOA case of the year. "Your Honor," Hughes began, "we're here seeking immediate injunctive relief against Mr. Thompson's solar panel installation, which violates community architectural standards and threatens neighborhood property values." Judge Williams looked around her darkened courtroom, then at me, sitting calmly at the defendant's table, then back at Hughes with the expression of someone beginning to understand that this case involved more than typical HOA drama. "Mr. Hughes, before we proceed with your motion for injunctive relief, I'm curious about the power outage affecting this courthouse, and apparently the entire area. Does anyone know what caused this electrical emergency?" That's when I stood up, smiled politely at Judge Williams, and delivered the line I'd been waiting months to say. "Your Honor, I can answer that question. I'm Marcus Thompson, Senior Grid Manager for Texas Regional Power Authority. I authorized routine maintenance on the electrical substation that provides power to this area, including the Ridgewood Hills development, where the plaintiffs are attempting to prohibit my use of renewable energy technology." The silence in the darkened courtroom was absolutely perfect. You could practically hear Brenda Morrison's brain trying to process the implications of suing the person who controlled her electricity for using solar panels that didn't require external power sources. Judge Williams leaned back in her chair and looked from me to Hughes to Brenda with the expression of someone who'd just realized she was dealing with a much more interesting case than typical property disputes. "Mr. Thompson, am I understanding correctly that you manage the electrical infrastructure that provides power to the community where the plaintiffs live, and they're suing you for installing solar panels that generate electricity independently of that infrastructure?" "That's correct, Your Honor. The plaintiffs are seeking to prohibit my use of state-protected renewable energy technology while their entire community remains dependent on traditional power, grid infrastructure, under my professional management. Bradley Hughes was frantically whispering with David Chen, clearly realizing that their carefully planned legal strategy had just collapsed under the weight of irony so heavy it could power a small city. "Your Honor," Hughes said, his voice significantly less confident than it had been during neighborhood threats. Mr. Thompson's employment status doesn't change the fact that his solar installation violates community architectural guidelines. Mr. Hughes, I'm more interested in understanding Texas renewable energy law than community guidelines that may conflict with state environmental protection statutes. Jake Rodriguez stood up with the calm confidence of someone who'd spent years winning environmental law cases in exactly this kind of situation. "Your Honor, Texas Property Code. Chapter 202 specifically prohibits HOA restrictions on solar panel installations. The plaintiffs are asking this court to enforce community rules that are preempted by state environmental law. Furthermore, Your Honor, the plaintiffs have engaged in a pattern of harassment, including false emergency reports, malicious complaints to multiple agencies, and attempts to intimidate someone engaged in state-protected environmental activity." Judge Williams reviewed the case documents while emergency lighting cast dramatic shadows across her courtroom. The power outage had created exactly the kind of atmospheric drama that made legal proceedings memorable. "Mr. Hughes, I'm looking at your complaint, and I don't see any citations to current Texas renewable energy statutes. Are you familiar with recent changes to state environmental protection law?" Hughes shuffled through his papers like someone looking for citations that didn't exist. "Your Honor, our research focused on HOA authority under community covenants and architectural review processes." Mr. Hughes, community covenants cannot override state environmental protection statutes. Texas actively encourages renewable energy installations and specifically limits HOA authority to prohibit them. The legal education continued for another 20 minutes, with Judge Williams explaining renewable energy law to lawyers who'd filed a case without understanding the legal framework they were challenging. "Mr. Thompson, when do you expect power to be restored to this area?" "Your Honor, maintenance on Substation 7 should be completed within the hour. Normal electrical service will resume once our technical crews finish safety inspections and restart procedures." "And Mr. Thompson, I assume your solar panels are continuing to generate electricity during this power outage?" "Yes, Your Honor. Solar installations with battery backup systems continue operating independently during grid outages. That's one of the primary advantages of renewable energy technology." Judge Williams looked at Brenda Morrison, who'd been sitting in increasingly uncomfortable silence while her legal case evaporated like morning dew under Texas sunshine. "Mrs. Morrison, do you understand that you're asking this court to prohibit the defendant from using technology that provides electrical independence during exactly the kind of power outage your community is currently experiencing?" Brenda's response was barely audible. "Your Honor, I just wanted to protect our neighborhood's appearance and property values." "Mrs. Morrison, Texas environmental law prioritizes renewable energy development over aesthetic concerns. Solar panels are considered beneficial technology that communities should encourage, not prohibit." The hearing concluded with complete victory for renewable energy rights and total defeat for HOA overreach. Judge Williams not only denied the injunction against my solar installation, but also awarded attorney fees under Texas environmental protection statutes and referred Brenda's false emergency reports to the district attorney for potential criminal charges. "Mr. Thompson, this court finds that your solar installation is fully protected under Texas renewable energy law, and that the plaintiff's attempt to prohibit it was frivolous and potentially malicious. Furthermore, this court notes the irony that plaintiffs sought to prohibit renewable energy technology from someone who actually manages the traditional electrical infrastructure their community depends on." As we walked out of the darkened courthouse into bright Texas sunshine, I could see Ridgewood Hills in the distance, still without power, while my solar panels continued generating clean electricity completely independently of grid infrastructure. The power came back on exactly 58 minutes later, just as I'd promised Judge Williams. But the legal and social consequences of Brenda Morrison's war against renewable energy lasted much longer. The criminal investigation into her false emergency reports resulted in misdemeanor charges and a plea agreement requiring community service with environmental organizations and educational classes about renewable energy technology. The HOA board of Ridgewood Hills voted unanimously to remove Brenda from her presidency after learning about her criminal charges and the legal fees her frivolous lawsuit had cost the community. Her replacement, Dr. Jennifer Martinez, was an environmental science professor who understood the benefits of renewable energy and worked to encourage more solar installations throughout the development. The story became a cautionary tale throughout Texas about HOA overreach and environmental ignorance. The Texas Solar Energy Society used our case as an example in educational presentations about homeowner rights and renewable energy protections. Most importantly, the case resulted in stronger enforcement of Texas renewable energy statutes and new penalties for HOA officials who attempt to prohibit state-protected environmental technology. 6 months later, Ridgewood Hills had become one of the most solar-friendly communities in Dallas, with over 40% of homes featuring renewable energy installations. Property values increased as buyers sought homes in neighborhoods that embraced environmental technology rather than fighting it. The morning after our court victory, I received a knock on my door from David Thompson, a neighbor who'd been quietly supporting my case, but was afraid to speak up during Brenda's intimidation campaign. Marcus, I wanted to thank you for standing up to the HOA about solar panels. My wife and I have been wanting to install our own system, but we're afraid of getting the same harassment you faced. David, you should never have to be afraid of generating clean energy on your own property. Texas law protects your right to energy independence. Within 3 months, David had installed his own solar array and was generating more electricity than his family consumed. His success encouraged 5 other neighbors to add renewable energy systems, creating a small community of energy-independent homes that could operate completely off-grid during power outages. The real victory wasn't just legal vindication or professional satisfaction. It was demonstrating that renewable energy technology benefits entire communities when people understand how it actually works instead of opposing it based on ignorance and aesthetic prejudice. Today, my solar panels continue generating clean electricity and feeding excess power back into the grid that serves my community. The same electrical infrastructure that Brenda Morrison thought gave her power over my energy choices actually benefits from the renewable energy I contribute to regional stability. Every morning, when I check my solar production readings, I think about the assumptions people make about technology they don't understand and authority they don't actually possess. Brenda Morrison spent months trying to prove that renewable energy didn't belong in residential communities, never realizing she was arguing with someone who'd spent his career designing exactly those kinds of energy systems. The lesson, if there is one, is that people who oppose environmental progress based on aesthetic concerns often discover that clean technology provides benefits they never considered. When the lights go out, solar panels with battery backup keep working. When electric bills get expensive, renewable energy provides independence. When communities embrace sustainable technology, property values increase and environmental impact decreases. Sometimes the best way to defend clean energy is to let ignorant opponents demonstrate their dependence on exactly the kind of electrical infrastructure that renewable technology is designed to supplement and eventually replace. About 18 months had passed since that victory. Ridgewood Hills had transformed into one of the greenest suburbs in Texas. The new HOA, under the leadership of Dr. Martinez, had launched programs to encourage solar energy installations, even arranging for bulk purchase discounts with companies. The panels in our neighborhood, once seen as ugly industrial equipment, had now become a symbol of status and foresight. As for Brenda Morrison, she had completed her community service and largely disappeared from public view. I would see her driving by occasionally. The haughty expression on her face had been replaced by a weary indifference. Life went on, and for me, that meant just focusing on the next project, the next efficiency optimization, until nature decided to remind everyone just how fragile a luxury electricity is. That winter, Texas faced one of the most brutal cold waves in its history. Meteorologists called it Winter Storm Uri. For me, it was the moment when theoretical knowledge and professional predictions turned into a harsh reality. Days before the storm hit, I was at my desk at the Texas Regional Power Authority, running stress test simulations for the statewide grid. The numbers were not encouraging. The risk of natural gas pipelines freezing, wind turbines icing over, and an unprecedented surge in demand was creating a perfect storm. The grid hadn't been subjected to such a comprehensive test in decades, and I knew better than anyone where its weakest links were. I sent an email to my neighbors in Ridgewood Hills. Using the emergency contact list we had created with Dr. Martinez's help, I advised everyone to check their generators, charge their batteries, and prepare for the worst. Even for those of us with solar panels, knowing the limits of our battery storage capacity was vital. The storm began on a Sunday night. First, a freezing rain, then snow, and then, as temperatures plummeted below freezing, everything was coated in a thick layer of ice. On Monday morning, at 1:50 a.m., I received the call I had been expecting but still dreaded. ERCOT, the state's grid operator, had ordered rolling blackouts to prevent an uncontrolled collapse. This meant millions of Texans would be plunged into a darkness that could last for days. And so it happened. At 2:15 a.m., the transformer outside my house went silent with a painful hum. Ridgewood Hills was plunged into darkness. But in my house, something was different. After a pause of a few seconds, my battery storage system kicked in. The automatic transfer switch disconnected my house from the grid and connected it entirely to my own generated power. The lights came back on. The heating system continued to run. Unlike the world outside, my little fortress was warm and bright. When I looked out the window, I saw lights on in 7 other houses in the neighborhood. David's house, the other 5 neighbors I had encouraged to install panels, and Dr. Martinez's house. We were a small archipelago in the middle of a dark sea. The next morning, the gravity of the situation became clear. There was no electricity. Water pressure had dropped because the pumps weren't working, and temperatures had fallen to record lows. People were freezing. It was at that moment that my engineer's brain took over. This wasn't just about keeping my own house warm. This was about keeping a community alive. I called David. "David, I have an idea, but it's a little crazy," I said. "If we can combine the power from our batteries, we could create a small microgrid and at least heat the community center." I wasn't surprised that David didn't hesitate. He was thinking the same thing. We called the other solar-powered homeowners. They were all ready. This was the moment when those panels, the ones Brenda claimed ruined the community aesthetic, now had the potential to save the community itself. We got to work. With heavy-duty extension cords from my garage, my knowledge of inverter settings and phase synchronization, we began to connect the houses. This was definitely not a standard procedure and involved serious risks. But on one hand, we had our neighbors facing the danger of freezing, and on the other, my 12 years of grid management experience. I believed I could manage the risk. Within a few hours, we managed to direct the surplus energy from 8 homes to our neighborhood clubhouse. When the lights and, most importantly, the heating system in the building came on, it felt like a small victory. Dr. Martinez immediately turned the clubhouse into a warming center. Soon, families wrapped in blankets with anxious faces began to pour in. They were there to charge their phones, have a hot coffee, and most importantly, to escape the freezing cold. Among those who came were a few members of Brenda's old board. Those same people who once looked down on me were now gratefully sipping hot soup. The irony was so thick at that moment, it was almost palpable. The third day was the darkest moment of the storm. Millions of people across the state were still without power, and news of tragedies was coming in. Our small microgrid, however, was holding on. During the day, our solar panels charged the batteries with what little light filtered through the clouds, and at night, we used this stored energy carefully. That evening, there was a knock on my door. It was David. He had a strange look on his face. "Marcus," he said, "it's Brenda. I passed by her house. Her window is broken, and there's no smoke coming from her chimney. Should we go check?" I hesitated for a moment. Brenda had put me through hell, but the temperature outside was below freezing, and this was no longer a personal matter. I nodded. We took our flashlights and carefully made our way down the icy roads to her house. We knocked on the door, no answer. We called out through the broken window, still no sound. David shouldered the door open. The inside was like an icebox. In the living room, in front of the fireplace, we saw Brenda, shivering, covered with every blanket she could find. The few damp logs she had tried to light in the fireplace had gone out. When she saw us, a brief flicker of fear appeared in her eyes, which was then replaced by a deep shame. The arrogant HOA president was gone, replaced by a vulnerable woman on the verge of freezing to death. I didn't say anything. "You're coming with me," was all I said. She tried to protest, but she didn't have the strength. I took her and her dog and brought them to my warm, well-lit home. I set her up in the guest room and gave her a hot tea. That night, she stayed warm under my roof with the electricity I generated. She survived on the power of my ugly panels. The next day, power slowly began to be restored to the grid. Our little island of energy had completed its mission. Brenda returned to her house early in the morning without saying a single word. But as she left, she had placed a small note on the kitchen table. "Thank you." Those 2 words meant more than the months-long legal battle and the tens of thousands of dollars in fines. When the storm passed, Ridgewood Hills was not the same. We were closer to each other. In that moment of crisis, we all understood how meaningless aesthetic concerns were, and that what really mattered was community and solidarity. Solar panel sales skyrocketed. People now wanted the technology not just to lower their bills, but also to be able to help their neighbors in the next storm. The war Brenda Morrison had started had, unintentionally, created one of the most resilient, energy-conscious, and united communities in Texas. Sometimes justice comes not just with high voltage, but also with a warm hand extended to you in your darkest moment. And that is far more satisfying than any legal victory. The aftermath of the storm wasn't confined to just our neighborhood's borders. The story of Ridgewood Hills, self-sufficient energy island, first spread to the local press, then to national news channels. Engineers, city planners, and representatives from other communities across Texas began to visit to learn how our little, unwanted microgrid worked. My superiors at the Texas Regional Power Authority, initially skeptical of this improvised solution that bent regulations, couldn't deny how effective the results were. Soon after, I was tasked with developing a new statewide pilot program called Community Energy Resilience. The war Brenda had started over aesthetic obsession had unintentionally opened a new and meaningful door in my career. I was no longer just managing the grid, but making it smarter, greener, and closer to the people. About a year later, the HOA, led by Dr. Martinez, held an annual meeting at the community center. The main item on the agenda was the purchase of a central battery storage unit for our neighborhood, so we could support more homes for a longer period during the next crisis. When I took the podium to present the technical details of the project, I saw a familiar face among the audience. It was Brenda Morrison, sitting in the back row, not speaking to anyone. She listened to me impassively throughout the presentation. When it was time to vote, and Dr. Martinez asked, "All in favor of the project?" nearly every hand in the room went up. My eyes, however, were on Brenda. After a moment's hesitation, she slowly and almost reluctantly raised her hand as well. We didn't make eye contact, no words were exchanged. But in that moment, I knew that everything was truly over, and that this was the real victory. Not defeating an enemy, but ensuring an idea was quietly accepted by everyone. Drop a comment telling me about your experiences with HOA harassment or renewable energy disputes. Have you ever had neighbors oppose environmental improvements that would benefit the entire community? How did you handle opposition to clean technology? Subscribe and hit that notification bell if you want more stories about ordinary people who used professional expertise to defeat environmental ignorance and HOA overreach. Sometimes the best revenge is simply being better at your job than your opponents think they are at theirs. From all of us at HOA Revenge Stories, thanks for watching today's episode of When Renewable Energy Meets Legal Reality and Wins Spectacularly. Remember, solar panels don't just generate clean electricity. They generate energy independence that no HOA president can take away. Until then, remember that clean energy is protected energy, and the people who try to prohibit renewable technology might discover they are more dependent on electrical engineers than they realized. Peace, justice, and sustainable energy. Independence for everyone. We'll see you in the next one.